some people who are being helpful, who are trying to get men to speak, who are trying to get men to not be quote unquote toxic, we would be told that real courage is being vulnerable. But here's the truth. Vulnerability without safety is not courage. If you're a female, stop demanding vulnerability from a man. You're asking him to give you something that is truly sacred. You're asking him to give you carte blanche access to his soul, to his limitations. And that is a high call. That is a high demand. That is costly. And guess what happens when your wounds get thrown back in your face? Man, you just get wounded further. Men walk away from that kind of situation, not feeling cared for, protected, or healed, but instead they walk away with more high walls, saying to themselves, this is why I don't trust anybody. And so when we flip the script, what happens when vulnerability is absent in marriage? Hey, what's up? Welcome to That Husband podcast with me, Blaque Nubon. Here we are husbands who aren't where we want to be, but certainly are not where we used to be. We are imperfect, always failing forward, trying to know better so that we can do better. Hey, what's up? Welcome to That Husband podcast with me, Blaque Nubon. This is where husbands try to know better so that we can do better. Before we jump into this episode, we want to thank everybody who's been supporting us. If you're new, you can support us by hitting that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you're updated on every single episode we drop every Wednesday at 11:30. Two ways you can support us. Number one, you can visit our website, thathusband.com, and you can find tickets to Beans and Bonds. This coming Saturday, the 4th of October, we have our husband prep, husband refresher workshop, and you can find tickets for that. You can also buy us coffee, and you can check out our online store to purchase some merch. Second way you can support us is by booking me as an MC, a speaker, or facilitator for your next event, and you can drop us an email at booking@blacknewborn.com. That's booking@blacknewborn.com. Today's episode comes highly demanded. I had the privilege earlier on this year of being invited to Mommy Diaries for their Father's Day special. Shout out to Mapaseka and her team and the work that they're doing there. And one of the questions that she asked me was, through the conversations that I've been having with husbands on this podcast, what are some valuable insights that I can pull from so that our female counterparts can glean and kind of get an understanding of what is happening in our psyches. And I spoke about the difference between vulnerability and transparency. And essentially what I was saying there is that if you are not married to a man, do not demand vulnerability from him. In fact, culture demands us to be vulnerable as men, but it's actually just not wise. It's reckless for any man to be vulnerable in a space where he will not be looked after, protected, or even healed. And you can't demand vulnerability from a man if that space does not exist. And that's why I think that only space that truly exists for vulnerability to be exercised in a way that's going to be beneficial, not just for the man, but for the person that he's vulnerable with, is in the context of marriage, right? You might think otherwise, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts. I'm keen to hear your feedback and even your pushback on this. And so I thought it would be cool to just extend this. In fact, some of you guys have seen that clip and you've said to me, man, can you just give us a full, in-depth, unpacked understanding of what you were alluding to in that short clip from Mommy Diaries? And so that's what we're going to speak about today, the difference between vulnerability and transparency, and why I think if you're not married to somebody, you should give them transparency. In fact, as humans, we should be transparent because that says much about our character. But vulnerability, man, that's a level deeper, in fact, layers deeper. And I think that only should be reserved for marriage. So let's start here. But like I said, I would really love for you to stick around till the end. I would love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, your pushback. Maybe there might be things I might miss out that you'd want me to double tap on, clarify, etc. But I think it's going to be a good conversation if you are part of it as well. And I'm not just, yapping away on my own. But like I said, man, we live in a time, in a culture that's constantly telling men real courage is being vulnerable. Real courage is being vulnerable. That sounds very noble. It sounds empowering in an age where there's been a clear attack on masculinity. There's been misunderstanding on what manhood is. And so some people who are being helpful, who are trying to get men to speak, who are trying to get men to not be quote unquote toxic, we would be told that real courage is being vulnerable. And I would agree with that statement. But again, it matters what context that vulnerability takes place in. This, on the surface, sounds noble, it sounds empowering, it sounds inspiring for men to stand anywhere and show their wounds, to spill our hearts and lay it bare. And somehow, if we do that, that's going to prove that we have strength. But here's the truth: vulnerability without safety is not courage. Vulnerability without safety is not courage. That safety nugget is very important because, again, the container, the context in which vulnerability takes place needs to provide the safety for protection, for the healing that vulnerability will demand. And so it's actually not courage if we are called to be vulnerable anyway. In fact, it just leaves us more exposed. And exposure in the wrong place doesn't build a man up. In fact, it tears him down. It does the total opposite. When we're exposed in the wrong context, in the wrong container, in the wrong space, it doesn't build a man up. It tears him down. That's why men must reclaim a healthier understanding of what vulnerability is. We need to be engaging with this. I think as men, we should not be afraid of the word vulnerable. In fact, the word vulnerable is good once we truly understand what it means and in what context should vulnerability take place and with who vulnerability should take place with. Once we reclaim a healthier understanding, I think it's going to truly empower us to show up in ways that are not only beneficial for us, but beneficial for those that we are being vulnerable with. Vulnerability is not meant for everyone. It's not meant for everywhere. In fact, vulnerability is too sacred to be cheapened or performed for the world. It belongs in one place. And I argue today that that one place is the covenant of marriage. I don't think vulnerability belongs anywhere else. And I can hear people unsubscribing. I can hear, chairs breaking and people's jaws hitting the floor. How can you say that vulnerability only exists in marriage? So what if I'm single? What if I'm never going to get married? What then? Man, we'll get into that and I will definitely unpack it for you. But I am saying right now, hear me, vulnerability exists in marriage. So what I'm saying is that if you're not married to somebody, if you're a female, stop demanding vulnerability from a man. You're asking him to give you something that is truly sacred. You're asking him to give you carte blanche access to his soul, to his limitations, to his weaknesses, to his vulnerabilities. And that is a high call. That is a high demand. That is costly. And if you have not committed to him and he hasn't committed to you for life, and I think that is an unfair call for anybody. If you're married, husbands, do not deny your wife vulnerability. Do not keep yourself and your soul and your heart and all that is in you away from your wife. You're shortchanging yourself. You are shortchanging the health of your marriage. You are shortchanging this experience that is supposed to transform you in ways that no other relationship will transform you. Why do I speak so strongly about vulnerability only existing in the context of marriage? Right? Think about what the root word of vulnerability is. Vulnerability comes from a Latin word that literally means being able to be wounded. In other words, vulnerability is woundability. I never say take notes on this podcast, but I would say pause here and write that down. Vulnerability literally means being able to be wounded. Directly translated, woundability. And so when I open myself up to somebody, I am showing them all the wounds that I carry, and I'm inviting them and I'm giving them carte blanche access to shift those wounds around, to touch them, to feel them, to smell them, to transform them. And that is critical work. That is big. That is demanding. And that cannot just happen anywhere, willy-nilly, with anybody. that has to happen with somebody who is truly committed to the process of my soul being transformed for me to become the person that I've presented myself to them and said, this is who I want to be. Vulnerability can only take place with a person who's committed to that process. Anybody else who's coming to play games, anybody who's here for cheap thrills, anybody who's just here so that they can have a good time, but not the long time, man, I cannot give them my vulnerability. I cannot do that as a man. I've said it countless times. That vulnerability is military language. In fact, that word in Latin, vulnus, means to be wounded, and it's given in a military context. But secondly, it's also given in the medical context. And so, what does that mean? In the military context, it demands protection. Two soldiers standing side by side, or back to back, rather. You know that one soldier has your back, and you have his back. You guys are vulnerable in the front. And so you're going to protect yourself with your weapon, but you know that your back is covered. And so your back vulnerabilities are covered, right? So you're not vulnerable in that regard. And in front, you know that you're protecting yourself with a weapon. And that's what vulnerability denotes in the man's mind, in the man when he thinks about being called out to be vulnerable. He thinks, man, this is me going to war, and if I'm not going to have somebody committed to my soul to protect me like a fellow soldier, then what are we doing? When you think of it in the medical context, it would then demand healing. I come into the hospital with a wound, and I need a doctor who's qualified, who's going to hold that wound with care and actually help administer the right medication so that I can become a better person. If you're not willing to protect, if you're not willing to go on a journey of healing, then what are we doing? What are we doing? Vulnerability is such a massive reality. It's not just a word, but it speaks of a relational context. I am woundable to somebody. I am woundable to something. And so if you are not the person who's willing to, one, see my wounds, secondly, carry those wounds. But here's another very important context. When you think about marriage, and that's why I am saying that vulnerability has to exist in that container. When you think about marriage, it is the becoming of one flesh. What is that becoming of one flesh? There is a wounding that is happening there. Right? I am coming in with all that I am. My wife is coming in with all that she is, and we're going to rub up against each other. We're going to wound each other in the process. And so if I have somebody who's not committed to protect my wounds, to heal my wounds, as we wound each other in becoming one, so this one beautiful picture can come together, this one new person can emerge. And if you're not committed to that, then what are we doing? What are we doing? It's not just sharing thoughts. That's not vulnerability. It's not just admitting my mistake. It's an opening up of the most fragile, the most tender parts of who I am, of my soul. The parts of me that carry scars, that carry limitations, that carry weaknesses and fragility. When those places are shared in an unsafe context, whether that's at work, whether that's on social media, whether that's in casual dating, non-committed relationships, man, they always get mishandled. They always get mishandled. Countless of men, countless of women, and I even, speak for you guys now. Countless of men and women have cried out about how their vulnerability has been thrown back in their face. And guess what happens when your wounds get thrown back in your face? Man, you just get wounded further. Men walk away from that kind of situation, not feeling cared for, protected, or healed, but instead they walk away with more high walls, saying to themselves, this is why I don't trust anybody. See, vulnerability in the wrong hands gets exploited. It gets used against you in conflict, and it gets dismissed, it gets mocked, it gets brushed aside, as if it did not matter in the first place. And far worse, which is another cry by men, it gets weaponized, it gets thrown in you, especially in the midst of a conflict where you are crying out for compassion, and all you are getting is people reminding you of how weak you are, of how limited you are. Vulnerability is not a thing to be thrown around. Instead of getting healed, men walk away from those moments feeling wounded and more guarded. And again, what was meant to build courage When culture says, show your wounds, that's going to demonstrate your courage and how strong you are. But instead, it leaves men retreating more into silence. And that's why there'll be this call. Men need to speak. Men need to open up. Men need to. Do not demand vulnerability from somebody that you haven't committed to protecting their heart for the rest of your life, to look after their soul and provide healing for their soul. Do not demand vulnerability, but instead, you can demand transparency. And men, listen closely. Transparency is what's needed. Sometimes we are called toxic because we fail to be transparent. And because we've confused transparency and vulnerability, and we think when we're supposed to be transparent, we are being demanded to be vulnerable, and therefore we close up completely. When you actually should say, in clarity, I'm not going to give you my vulnerability, but as a human, I can be transparent. What is transparency? It's honesty combined with wisdom. Let me say that again. Transparency is honesty combined with wisdom. It's about being real with others. It's allowing people to see your life, your character, and even your struggles, while still protecting the most tender parts of your heart. When people come to this podcast, you guys have given us shout outs for being vulnerable. Man, it's cool to see men being vulnerable. Let me put a pin there and say, we're not vulnerable in this podcast. We are transparent. We're very transparent on this podcast, but we're not vulnerable. And I am not going to demand vulnerability from the men that come sit here and share their lives with me and share their lives with us. Man, but I cry out for their transparency. And by God's grace, and I love these dudes, they've been very, very transparent with us. Vulnerability is reserved for their wives. My vulnerability is reserved for my wife. But here, totally transparent. What is transparency like? It's like a glass window. Light comes through it. People can see what's inside, but there's still a barrier that keeps what's fragile safe. That's what transparency is. Transparency is saying, look through the window. See the windows behind me? Look through them. You can see the contents inside this place, but I'm not opening the door for you to come shift furniture, to touch things, to sit. My father wounds, I've shared about my transparency with the state of the relationship I have with my father. But there's only one person who can come in and touch the furniture of my father wounds and move things around and call me out in certain situations where she can clearly tell you are acting from your father wound. Hey man, you're defining yourself by what you're not here. She has carte blanche access to speak that to me, to come move things, to call things out of me when she sees that and when it's appropriate and when it's time to do so. And she can do exactly that because she has demonstrated a level of commitment to my soul, to my heart for the rest of her life. And that's what vulnerability is. Transparency is saying, hey guys, here's a window. And I need to live as a transparent person to show up in a way that is good. Because who does not want a person and a man who's not transparent? If you don't know somebody's character and they're living a double life, who wants that? Nobody wants that. And so if you're dating, if you're in a relationship, you are engaged to somebody, demand transparency. Demand transparency. You need to know who is this person that you want to commit yourself to for long term. And transparency will give you that. But once you cross over that invisible threshold and you say, I do, man, they opening the door, you opening the door to say, come in, move the contents, touch the furniture, see how it feels. And you can change the paint, you can change the carpets, you can change the ceiling, you can change the lights if you want. And you know that it's good and beneficial for me. That's what vulnerability is. Vulnerability goes much deeper. Again, it's sacred exposure. That's what vulnerability is. Sacred exposure. It's when I lower every defense and I allow my wife to come into my scars, to come into my insecurities, into my fears. It's that kind of access that should only be given to somebody that you know and you trust. And so it can't be given lightly. Transparency, on the other hand, is for brothers. It's for mentors. It's for trusted friends. Vulnerability, and I say this, highlight this, tweet this, quote this, is only for your wife. Vulnerability is only for your wife. The danger comes in when men and women who demand this confuse the two. That's when the danger comes in. Our culture shouts vulnerability is bravery, but that is only true in the right container. I am brave by being vulnerable to my wife only. I'm not being brave by being vulnerable to the world. I can't give the world what the world is not designed to handle. Can't. Think of fire. Think of fire. Fire provides warmth. Fire provides light in the right context, in a fireplace. But when fire is in a dry field, it destroys everything in its path. And so is vulnerability. And let me say here, that's why, and I don't know what you believe, right? I believe in the God of the Bible, in Jesus, right? And he tells us for us not to engage in sexual relation before we get married. Sounds outdated, sounds old fashioned, sounds like something that's like so archaic, right? But think about this in light of the conversation that we're having. Women, when you open up yourself to a man for the first time, there is a wounding that happens. You are opening yourself up to be wounded by him. And if somebody is not going to handle your wounds after that, for the sake of protection, for the sake of healing, for the sake of growing, for the sake of nurturing, for the sake of pouring his heart and his soul into you, why would you want to be wounded by somebody that's just going to go on and wound other people for the rest of their lives? They're not committed to you, and then you just left exposed. Why? Why? And vice versa with men, right? There might not be an actual physical wounding when you come and consummate with somebody, but man, there is a giving of yourself. You feel insecure about who you are as a man. You've probably learned what sexuality is from other sources, not your parents. You didn't have a dad who taught you how to handle sex. And so there is a lot of weaknesses, insecurities, fears that you go into the thing with. Why would you want to wound yourself in that way with somebody who has not committed themselves to you for life? Why? It's exactly like fire. Outside of its proper context, it destroys. Vulnerability works in the same way. In the wrong place, without covenant commitment, it's not bravery, it's just recklessness. That's what it is. That's why so many men who overshare online, and we've seen that, who bleed emotionally in unsafe relationships, walk away not healed, but full of shame. Full of shame. And you ask, man, again, why were you vulnerable on the internet? Why were you vulnerable with a woman who clearly hasn't demonstrated that she's committed to you for life? And you walk away feeling shame. You walk away feeling unheard. You walk away feeling more bruised than healed. See, the world tells you that you've done something courageous by sharing your weaknesses and opening up your soul like that. But what you actually feel is destabilized. You feel weaker. You feel hesitant to trust again. And so when we flip the script, what happens when vulnerability is absent in marriage? Because I know that's what you're probably also thinking, like, but I know there's people who are divorced. So if vulnerability works only in the context of marriage, what happens with everybody then who is divorced?
Hello, hi, igama lami uTJ Mgabe Makabaza. I'm a marriage and relationship therapist. I just want to invite you to come and join us nge-4 zika-October with that husband prep. So this is a workshop la sobe sigelezisa khona izinto ezibalekile. One of the things that I'm going to teach you is for you to understand ukuthi as a husband, as a boyfriend, it's okay not to be okay. Number 2, ngizobe ngikhuluma ngezinto ezibalekile ezokubonisa about your childhood traumas ukuthi how they continue to be your blind spot namhlanje at your old age.
What happens when vulnerability is absent in marriage? Because I know that's what you're probably also thinking, like, but I know there's people who are divorced. So if vulnerability works only in the context of marriage, what happens with everybody then who is divorced? The results are not just damaging. Okay, when a husband or a wife refuses to be vulnerable, the walls go up where the door is supposed to be open. And that's why I keep saying to husbands who are married, do not deny your wife vulnerability, because where the doors are supposed to be open, what you're doing is that you are building walls. And here's what happens with those walls: that those walls from the outside, your marriage might look fine, it might look stable and functional, but in the inside, you are living as strangers. You are roommates. Those hidden wounds fester because your spouse never gets a chance to tend, to care, to look after those wounds. That's exactly what I'd be doing if I'm not vulnerable in my marriage. If I'm not vulnerable at all, the door is closed. I've built walls. Therefore, my wife can't come in, move the furniture, touch things, help do what God has called her to do in my life. Man, I'll be living with a glorified roommate. And that's why those kind of marriages end. See, over time, emotional distance grows so wide that marriage becomes fragile, brittle, and then it just ends. John Gottman, who's just such a brilliant researcher when it comes to marriages. In fact, he has such a dope book, The 7 Principles of a Successful Marriage. I think that's what it's called, if I'm not butchering the title. John Gottman. So check him out. But he's the foremost leading researcher when it comes to determining predictors of how people end up in divorce. In fact, he has done experiments, man, since probably is it the 60s, if I'm not mistaken? And he's interviewed and done experiments on thousands and thousands and thousands of couples, so much so that he has an 80 to 90% chance of determining if a couple is going to divorce. So when he looks at you, part of the book, he puts couples in a room and he just studies them. And he can tell with how they speak, how their body language is towards each other. And he can then predict with a 80 to 90% chance likelihood of what this couple, what are the predictors that will determine that they're going to get divorced, right? And he cites that one of the biggest factors is a lack of vulnerability. A lack of emotional openness in a marriage is one of the strongest predictors of divorce, second to infidelity, right? That's insane. That's insane. That the second thing is the fact that people are not vulnerable. If you're not vulnerable with your wife, that will definitely lead your marriage down to the dirt, man. Be vulnerable with your wife. Open up to your wife and make sure that she knows all who you are, who you want to become. And that's going to really lead you to a healthy place as a man, but also to the health of your marriage. To put it bluntly, a marriage without vulnerability is a marriage that is starving of true connection. That's what it is. If you're not vulnerable, you are starving yourself, you're starving your wife, your marriage is starving. Okay, this is why husbands in particular must take the lead to practice vulnerability. Right? When you think about what the Bible says, that husbands are the head of their wives, but the head is not there for domination, but the head is there for responsibility. Lead your wife in vulnerability. If you are being vulnerable, your wife will mimic that. You know, wives are designed for that. You give them a seed, they multiply that thing, they give birth to it. If you are being vulnerable with your wife, that's going to encourage, inspire, invite her to be vulnerable with you as well. And this wounding that is happening as you guys are becoming one, it's going to happen constantly and in real time. And you guys are going to wound each other, but care for each other's wounds. And the wounding that happens when vulnerability is actually practiced in a healthy way is a wounding that builds you guys. Things have to break down. You know, us guys who go to the gym, I walk. I'm a walking guy. Right? But anyway, us guys who go to the gym, right? You have to break down muscles for them to grow. Things have to be broken down. A seed has to go into the ground to die before it can grow and become a tree that will produce fruit. So things have to be broken down. Wounding has to happen in marriage for you guys to build something that is sustainable, something that's healthy, something that's beautiful, something that's going to benefit the kids and anyone else who's an onlooker of your marriage. And so husbands, you need to lead in vulnerability. You need to be the one who's demonstrating vulnerability for your wife. Here are my scars. Say to her, here are my struggles. Here's the place where I need grace. You model true courage once you do that. You invite your wife into a deeper kind of intimacy that sets the tone for mutual openness. This is exactly what Jesus does for his bride, man. This is incredible to think of, that Jesus got wounded, was vulnerable, got wounded for his bride. And that's the standard of that husband. That husband got wounded so that his bride will be saved, so that his bride could become all that she was meant to be. And he calls us then to submit. That is wounding to us, to submit. And that's why there's this beautiful marriage between Christ and his bride. And that's what he's calling husbands to. Wound yourself for your wife and let your wife wound herself for you. Expose each other's wounds, because to be human is to be woundable. Is to be woundable. We are susceptible to be wounded, to be hurt, to be harmed. And so, why not get into a space, a context, a container where this wounding is intentional for the sake of growing you to become all that you believe God has intended you to be? Wound yourself intentionally. Do not wound yourself recklessly in public. So, husbands, lead in this regard. Lead in this regard. I would urge you, husbands, lead. Wives, if you have a husband, encourage him to lead in this regard. Do not press into his vulnerabilities in ways that will cause him to close up. But when you speak about the fact that he needs to open up and be vulnerable with you, do not demand it. And Beaver, walk with him. Tell him this is exactly what's naturally happening by the very design of marriage. You're going to have to open up. You're going to have to wound yourself by opening up your other wounds so that I can see them. And you likewise need to do the same. So husbands, be encouraged in this regard. And once you do this, it really creates a cycle of trust, of intimacy, of unity that strengthens your marriage and reflects the love that you believe God has placed in your marriage. See, if you do this, then there's a healthy pathway in your marriage. There's going to be fruits that are born. There's going to be results that come because you have chosen to wound yourself in this regard. Think of single people. You might be saying to yourself, so what if I don't get married, which I mentioned earlier on? Where will my space of vulnerability come? Can I be vulnerable with my mom, with my dad, with my siblings, with my best friend? Maybe if I'm dating with my fiance, if I'm engaged? And my answer would be no. I don't think that those kind of relationships, as beautiful, as good as they are, can provide the kind of space, the kind of context that requires a level of vulnerability. I don't think so. Why? Because you're not committed to people, that you're not married to, that you're going to be with them for life. But also, there's parts of you, there's things about you that you're not going to do and say with your mom, your dad, your best friend, or somebody that you're dating or engaged with. There's parts of you that you will still keep hidden away. Before you cross the invisible line of marriage, most of us just bring our best representative. And I know some people say, no, but I live authentically. I live as all that I am. And I'm like, cool, kudos for you. But again, at the back of our minds, when there isn't a level of commitment for life, a level of commitment to permanency, then we all live with the door open. And then we all live bringing our best representative, the person that we want the other person to see as good because we want them to be attracted to us and stick around. But once we get into marriage, all of those things kind of fade away. Whether you do that intentionally, but the design of marriage is going to work that stuff out of you so that you're not coming with a facade and you're not showing a face. And again, what really holds that together, right? Because somebody might say, I've known people who pretend. And I'll tell you where the mirror cracks. There's three layers that cause marriage to be a restrictive relationship, to be a restrictive institute. And if a person does not holistically, honestly, and earnestly, and sacrificially give themselves to those three layers of restriction, then I don't think that person is ready to be married. But secondly, I think they're pretending when they're in a marriage and they're not committed to these three layers of restriction. What are those three layers? The first layer is the truth that marriage is restricted by God. It's God's design. He determines what marriage is like. He determines the boundaries. He determines who gets to participate in this wonderful gift that he gives us. And so if you're not going to submit to that, and again, let me say, I always say to people, it doesn't matter what you believe, but all of us have a worldview. And whatever worldview you imbibe, you espouse, you part of, man, that worldview will have something to say about marriage. And even that worldview will bring a level of restriction. In my worldview, God creates marriage. God is the one who designs it. God is the one who determines its boundaries, its limits, and who can participate in that. And so if my wife is not committed to that and my wife is not holistically, wholeheartedly surrendered to that restriction, then it is going to be hard for us in our marriage. Secondly, it is restricted by society and family. Most cultures, if not all cultures and families, have rules. They have ways in which marriage is supposed to exist, to be conducted, and what are the requirements for somebody to be in a marriage. In South Africa, a big one is you have to go ask the girl's family for her hand in marriage. You have to pay lobola. There's certain things that you have to go through, and so families are not just going to give their girls away. There's certain things that you have to go through to ask for a hand in marriage. That's restricting. And what also that means is that there's a layer of accountability. When people come to your wedding, some people think that they just came there to eat. No. That's why when the minister gets up, he asks if anybody has reason to believe that these two are not supposed to be married. Man, say it now, forever hold your peace. Why does he do that? Because you who are part of the audience came as witnesses to hold both spouses accountable to the institute that they're giving themselves to. So that one day when you see me at Pick and Pay walking with a lady named Betty, when you know my wife is Lily, then you can call me accountable, right? Why? Because I invited you to my wedding not to eat pela, right? But for you to witness this, to also be a person who will keep us accountable. And so if I'm not going to be held accountable by family, by society, and those that have brought into our community, then man, I am going to have two-faced. Then I am going to be somebody who's really going to live a double life and not be truly committed to this vow that I said I'm going to be here for all of my life, and this commitment to permanency. Right? And the third layer of restriction is the law. Countries have laws around marriage, right? That's why you go sign. And some people might think, well, that's restrictive, that's wrong, blah, blah, blah. I think it's supposed to be there. I think it's good. And I think it really causes people to enter marriage soberly and not go into marriage thinking that, man, this is just going to be for me. No. Think, man, this is good. I'm going to benefit for this, but it's really for the other person. Am I ready for that other person to be the kind of person who will open themselves up with their wounds? Am I ready to be wounded by them? Am I ready to be the one who is also in the design of marriage being used to wound that other person? Am I ready to protect her wounds? Am I ready to heal her wounds? So I'm saying that's why those restrictions are truly important. And so if somebody does not give themselves wholeheartedly, holistically to the restriction of what marriage is, then don't do it. Then you're not ready for it. But once we're in there, man, you have to be vulnerable. You have to give your vulnerability. And so what am I saying to single people here? If you're not married, that kind of vulnerability will exist with God. Will exist with God, right? God will be the one who comes in, moves things in your heart, changes things about you so that you can become the person that he intended you to be. In my case, again, I believe marriage is a gift. And so I don't think I'm more special than a single person, not at all. But in God's wisdom and his providence, he saw that for me to have things that break about me, he will do that through marriage. And so vulnerability for me looks like admitting that God is the one who comes into the door to change the furniture, and he uses my wife as an instrument to do so. He uses my spouse in real time to be an instrument of him coming into the house and changing things. He does it ultimately to single people. He does it to married people. It's that with married people, he chooses it to do it through their spouses. And so if I'm married, man, I'm going to open myself up to my wife to be vulnerable, and I encourage her to do the same. If you're single, I would say, man, let's go to God. Go to God. Again, whatever worldview you espouse, whatever worldview you imbibe, you believe, your maker. Give your vulnerability to if you're single. But if you're married, just give your vulnerability to your spouse, and let your maker be the one who uses your spouse as an instrument to change who you are in your wounds, right? So I hope that's helpful. And again, I would love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your commitments to this. Where are you? How committed are you to vulnerability? How committed are you to transparency? But I do think, again, if you're not married, if you're single, gents, give transparency. Give transparency so that we are not labeled as men who are toxic, who live double lives, men who are not truthful at all. And again, your transparency is for whoever you want to give your transparency to. It's not just for everybody, right? But for you to grow, for you to grow in your character, you need to have brothers around. You need to have mentors. You need to have a community. Let them see your life clearly, but let there be a God to the deepest parts of your heart. You can't just give that to everybody. Don't hand over your most fragile wounds to somebody who's not covenantally committed to you. That's not hiding, it's just wisdom. It's not hiding, it's wisdom. We live, especially in a very strange time, in a strange culture where we just have access to each other more than people in previous generations had. And so we need to be wise about who we give our vulnerability to. But our transparency, that's just human etiquette. That's just human, it's basic human characteristics. Like, we just need to be transparent. We need to be people who are not living double lives and lying and hiding. Nobody wants that. Not at work, not at church, not in your community, and certainly not in a friendship, certainly not in an engagement, or if you are dating somebody. You don't want somebody to lie. So be transparent. Be transparent, right? But make sure that the transparency comes with a level that guards your soul, guards your heart. It preserves your strength. It preserves your integrity. It preserves your readiness for the day when you can entrust your whole self to your wife, right? For married men, this call again is different. Once you are in a covenant, vulnerability is not only safe, but it is necessary. It's not only just safe, but it's truly necessary. Marriage creates a context that is strong enough to handle your exposure that vulnerability requires. The covenant that wounds you as you become one with your wife, gives space for you not to be exploited, but instead it gives you space to be healed. It's in that covenant that your scars don't create shame. They don't create embarrassment, but they create intimacy. It's in that covenant that as a husband who's vulnerable, it doesn't make you weak, but instead it does make you strong, because it deepens your trust. It fosters unity. It allows both you and your spouse to be fully known and to be fully loved. Why would you be in a marriage where you are not fully seen, where you are not fully known? For women, the challenge is to stop demanding vulnerability from men who are not your husband. Transparency can and should be shared in safe and healthy ways, but true vulnerability is reserved for a covenant. And when it comes to your husband, vulnerability is something not to fear, not to resent, but it is something to cherish, because it's at his weakest when he exposes himself that he's truly courageous, and that's a gift that he gives to you. And so the bottom line is this: vulnerability is too sacred to be casual. Transparency is how men build trust in right spaces, but vulnerability only belongs in marriage, where it creates intimacy, healing, and oneness. And it's in God's design. See, if our culture can recover that distinction, I think then we can stop wounding men with false expectations. And instead, we will see marriages that are strengthened, families that are healed, and men walking in the kind of courage that does not just leave them exposed or even expose their wounds, but transforms them into a source of love, trust, and life. And so I would say to you today, again, if you're a woman who's not married, do not demand vulnerability. Ask for transparency. If you're a man that is married, you're a husband, make sure you do not deny your wife vulnerability. All right, that's it for me, man. A lot could be said. We could be here for another couple of minutes, but I just wanted to kind of expand these thoughts and hear what you guys have to say. Do not forget, this coming Saturday, the 4th of October, we have our husband prep and husband refresher workshop. I'm going to be there. DJ Mgabe Makabaza is going to be there. Temba Tom Tuli is there, and Jabu Zwane. And we're going to be speaking about the things that men have forgotten. If you've been married for a couple of years and you just want to refresher, what kind of husband should you be in your marriage now that your marriage is going to be healthy? And man, you might be struggling. You might be at a place where you're at the edge. come through. I urge you, pull through to this workshop. It's going to help you. But it's also for husbands to be. If you're a husband to be, didn't have a father, didn't have other role models around you, and you just been following us, walking with us in this podcast, and you're like, man, I really want to be prepped as a husband so that I can walk in ways that are healthy. You're not going to be perfect. None of us are. But man, we have a chance to be healthier and better husbands than generations before us, because we have each other. We have tools. We can speak. We can correct each other. We can walk hand in hand as brothers. So pull through for that. It's going to be beneficial for you as well, for your future marriage and for your future family. Right? From me and the squad here, and we'll see you next week, Wednesday at Hoppers 11. Again, let me know what you think about this. I would truly, truly appreciate your thoughts, pushback, your comments. It's just going to be super dope as we engage. All right, for me and the team, we'll see you next week. Peace.